They say kindness costs nothing, but for Shanice Williams, it cost her everything. At least, that's what she thought at the time. A single mother decided to break the rules to serve one last customer, a tall man sitting quietly in the corner of the diner. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know the man was Shaquille O'Neal. And she definitely didn't know that the next morning she would lose her job. But sometimes, losing everything is the best thing that can happen, because the greatest dreams often come when you're not looking for them. And sometimes being fired isn't the end, it's just the beginning. This is the story of how a waitress chose kindness over rules, and how that decision changed not just her life, but an entire generation. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The clock on the wall of Jerry's diner read 11:45 p.m. The atmosphere was unusually quiet, with only a few customers left sipping their last cups of coffee. Shanice Williams, a single mother, rubbed her aching legs after 10 hours of non-stop waiting tables. It had been a long day, but she had no choice. Inside her apron pocket, today's tips totaled just over $80, not nearly enough to cover the $500 needed to send Destiny, her daughter, to summer basketball camp. She remembered the conversation she had with Destiny earlier that morning. "Mom, can I go to the basketball camp this summer? Coach says I'm improving a lot." Her daughter's eyes sparkled with hope, but Shanice couldn't lie. She sighed, helpless, ran her fingers through her daughter's curly hair, and softly replied, "I'll try, sweetheart, but we need to save more." Destiny nodded in understanding, but disappointment was still clear in her eyes. "I have to earn more, even just a little." The doorbell rang, the last customer of the night. Shanice was jolted back to the present by the chime of the doorbell. She turned her head. A tall man, extremely tall, ducked his head as he stepped inside. He wore a baseball cap that covered most of his face and a loose jacket. Still, she recognized something familiar. The build of a professional athlete. The instinct of a seasoned waitress kicked in. He looked tired, probably had a long day and just wanted a quiet meal. But there was a problem. Brad, the manager, had a strict rule. No customers after 11:30. She glanced at the counter. The security camera was aimed directly at her. Brad would review the footage tomorrow morning. She swallowed, ready to go over and tell the customer the restaurant was closed. But as she looked into his tired eyes, she hesitated. Everyone needs a late-night meal sometimes. What's wrong with helping someone? Shanice took a deep breath, grabbed the menu, and said, "Please come in, sir. If you could, please order quickly, as the kitchen is about to close." The man smiled, a friendly smile, but something about it felt very familiar. "Thank you. I really need a quiet place to eat." She led him to a secluded corner, away from the view of the security camera. Shanice knew she was breaking the rules, but she had no idea that this small decision would change her life forever. Shanice put the menu down on the table, subtly adjusting her apron, trying to hide the tension in her heart. She wasn't someone who usually broke the rules, but there was something about this man that made it impossible for her to turn away. He looked tired, as if he'd had a long day and just wanted a quiet place to eat. No one wanted to be turned away from a meal just because they arrived a few minutes late, especially when they just needed a bit of time to rest. The man leaned back in his chair, his broad shoulders almost blocking out the light from the overhead lamp. He flipped through the menu, skimmed a few lines, then looked up with a thoughtful yet friendly gaze. "Do you have anything special?" Shanice smiled briefly, the tension in her fading as she noticed how friendly the guest seemed. She had been in this job long enough to tell who was a picky eater and who just wanted a good meal without causing any trouble. Fried chicken and waffles. They say it's the best in Charlotte. The man chuckled, a warm laugh that sounded familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. Sounds great. Do you have kids? The question caught Shanice off guard, but she quickly nodded, her eyes sparkling with pride as if destiny were right there in front of her. Yes, destiny. She loves basketball more than anything else in the world. He nodded, tapping his fingers lightly on the table as though he was thinking about something, a look of interest on his face, but no further words. Basketball, huh? That's good. Does she have big dreams? Shanice laughed, a warmth in her voice as she remembered how Destiny would often talk about her idols, her eyes shining whenever she mentioned the WNBA. She wants to play professionally. The WNBA is her biggest goal. The man nodded, his gaze thoughtful but not overly emotional. He smiled quietly, looking down at the cup of coffee in front of him before lapsing into silence. When the meal arrived, he ate slowly, not in a rush, savoring each peaceful moment. Shanice returned to the counter, trying to finish up her chores, but she still felt there was something very strange about this guest. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at the security camera in the corner of the restaurant. Brad would surely review the footage tomorrow morning, and if he found out she had broken the rules, she could be in trouble. But had she really done anything wrong? Didn't everyone deserve a late-night meal once in a while? A hungry man shouldn't be denied just because he was a few minutes late. When the man stood up, Shanice quickly moved toward the table to check him out, but before she could say anything, he placed a stack of cash on the table. She stared at the $100 bills right in front of her. 5 bills, $500. Shanice froze, her heart racing in her chest. She opened her mouth to protest, but the man just smiled mysteriously, his gaze holding something she couldn't understand. Thank you for your kindness. Then he turned and walked out the door, his tall figure blending into the night before she could react. Shanice bent down to pick up the bills, her hand trembling slightly. This was exactly the amount of money she needed to send Destiny to basketball camp. In that moment, all the worries, all the struggles of working tirelessly seemed to vanish. She had hoped for a miracle to appear, and now it had come. But that joy didn't last long. On the ceiling, in the corner of the restaurant, the security camera was still recording. The footage of her, the late guest, and the enormous tip had all been clearly captured. In the surveillance room, Brad would soon be watching that footage. And to him, this wasn't a story about a single mother trying to help her daughter chase her dreams, nor was it an act of kindness toward a stranger in need of a meal. To Brad, this was just an employee breaking the rules. And tomorrow, the consequences would come. The early sunlight filtered through the small window of the apartment, waking Shanice from a not-so-long but sweeter sleep than any night before. She lay on the bed for a few seconds, letting her heart fill with happiness as she thought about the money safely tucked in her wallet. $500. A dream that once seemed far out of reach was now within her grasp. When she walked into the kitchen to make coffee, she saw Destiny sitting at the dining table, still wearing her basketball practice gear, her mouth full of eager excitement. "Mom, are you sure I'll be able to go to summer camp?" Shanice smiled, gently stroking her daughter's hair. For the first time in many months, she could speak without hesitation. "Absolutely, sweetheart. I've taken care of it." Destiny jumped up, hugging her mom tightly before bouncing around the room. Seeing her daughter's joy, Shanice felt that all her efforts were worth it. Even though she had broken the rules yesterday. If she had to do it again, she would still help that guest, because she believed that kindness was never a mistake. But when she walked into Jerry's diner that morning, a harsh truth was waiting for her there. Brad stood right in front of the counter, arms crossed over his chest, his face darkened like a storm about to break. The diner was empty, as the morning shift hadn't started yet, and the only sound was the buzzing of the security camera on the computer screen. Go to the office. Now. His voice was cold, without a trace of hesitation. Shanice felt her heart race, but she still followed him, trying to maintain her calm. Brad sat down, turned the computer screen toward her, and pressed the fast-forward button on the recording. The image of her serving the strange man at 11:47 p.m. appeared clearly. The angle of the camera missed nothing. She had led him to a table, brought food, chatted, even smiled as she left. And finally, the scene of the man placing a stack of cash on the table was shown in full view. Brad stared at her, his voice sharp as a knife. You know the rule. No customers after 11:30. Who do you think you are to decide? Shanice swallowed hard, trying to stay composed. Brad, I know I shouldn't have served him late, but that man, he was just hungry. He didn't cause any trouble, and... Brad interrupted, his voice rising in anger. A rule is a rule. If you serve one person late, you'll serve two. If you start thinking you have the right to decide who eats after hours, then tomorrow we'll have a bunch of people standing in front of the diner at midnight. Who's going to pay for the insurance if something happens? Who's going to take responsibility if someone gets robbed when the diner is closed? Or do you think this place is yours? Shanice clenched her fists. She had never seen it that way before, but she had never thought that giving one person a meal could be considered such a big mistake. She looked Brad straight in the eye, trying to keep her voice calm but unable to hide her frustration. He wasn't a thief. He just needed a meal, and he was very kind to me. Brad raised an eyebrow, then let out a mocking laugh. Kind? You think he's Shaquille O'Neal? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, shaking his head in disappointment as if he were looking at a fool. Have you ever wondered why someone would leave a $500 tip? That's not kindness, that's bribery. Someone like that doesn't leave a big tip without a reason. Shanice opened her mouth to retort, but Brad's gaze turned colder than ever. I don't care who he is. I just know one thing. You broke the rules, and I warned you before. You gave extra food to a hungry customer, stayed late to listen to Mrs. Johnson's story, and now you're opening after hours? Do you think this is a charity center? He extended his hand, his voice void of any emotion. Give me your name tag and apron. You're fired. Shanice froze, feeling as though someone had punched her in the chest. 8 years of dedication, 8 years of serving, 8 years spent helping customers in every free moment. And this is how they treated her? She looked around the room, the place she had worked for nearly a decade, where every customer was a part of her memory. They weren't just people who ordered food, they were people she knew, people she cared about. But now, it was all over. With a trembling hand, she removed the name tag from her shirt, placed it on the table, then took off the apron, folded it neatly, and set it on top. She didn't cry. She wasn't going to give Brad the satisfaction of seeing her break down. As she walked toward the door, she felt a stare from the counter. Maria, her close co-worker, was watching, her eyes full of sympathy and anger. She didn't turn back. The only thing she knew at that moment was that the $500, instead of being a source of joy, was now all she had. She stepped out of the diner, the cold morning air hitting her lungs like a slap. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost didn't want to answer, but when she saw the unfamiliar number, something told her that this wasn't just any call. "Hello? Is this Shanice Williams?" She took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm Shanice. Who's calling?" On the other end of the line, a polite but authoritative voice spoke. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Shaquille O'Neal. He would like to meet with you this morning at the Charlotte Hornets office. Can you come?" Shanice couldn't speak. Her hand gripped the phone tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. What in the world was happening? She glanced toward the window of Jerry's diner, where Brad was still standing with a smug expression. She turned away, unaware that the decision to help a customer the night before had changed her life in a way she never could have imagined. Shanice stepped out of Jerry's diner, her eyes blurred by angry and disappointed tears. She couldn't believe that 8 years of dedication had ended in just a few minutes because of someone like Brad, a man who always valued rules over people. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails nearly dug into her palms. 8 years of devoted service, 8 years spent helping customers during every free moment, 8 years using her meager savings to wrap extra sandwiches for the homeless who passed by the diner. And now, it was all wiped away, just because she had given a man a meal after closing hours. Everything seemed to crumble. She had lost her job. She had lost her only source of income. She had lost the fragile stability she had worked so hard to build for Destiny. She leaned against the car, her hands covering her face, hot tears streaming down despite her efforts to hold them back. $500, the amount she had thought was a miracle the night before, was now all she had. It no longer held the meaning of an opportunity opening up for Destiny's future, but had become the only lifeline for the two of them in the days ahead. Brad had taken her job, but not just that. He had taken away her faith in kindness. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had to think. She had to figure something out. Just then, her phone buzzed. Shanice exhaled, quickly wiped her tears and glanced at the screen. A strange number. She hesitated for a second, then pressed the answer button. "Hello?" A professional, clear female voice came through from the other end. "Hello? Is this Shanice Williams?" "Yes, this is she." She went silent, a gut feeling telling her this wasn't just a normal call. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Shaquille O'Neal." Shanice froze, almost dropping the phone. "He wants to meet with you this morning at the Charlotte Hornets office. Can you come?" Shanice couldn't find her voice. Her heart raced wildly in her chest. Brad was right about one thing. The man from the night before really was Shaquille O'Neal. And now he was calling her. She blinked, trying to confirm if she was dreaming. An hour ago, she was fired, standing in the face of an uncertain future. Now, a basketball legend wanted to meet with her. I can," she stammered. "Good. We look forward to seeing you in 30 minutes. The call ended, but Shanice remained frozen in place. She didn't understand what was happening. But one thing was for sure. This meeting could change everything. Shanice was driving with her mind still in turmoil, trying to calm herself after what had just happened. An hour ago, she lost her job, her only source of income taken away, leaving her to face an uncertain future. Now, she was on her way to meet Shaquille O'Neal, a basketball legend she never thought she would have the chance to meet. Everything was happening so fast, so unexpectedly, she could hardly believe it was real. Her old Toyota stopped in front of the Charlotte Hornets office building, a towering glass structure reflecting the entire city. She stepped out, feeling small among the neatly dressed businessmen, confident individuals entering with a self-assured air. She took a deep breath, adjusted her faded jacket, and tried to keep calm before entering. The grand lobby was brightly lit with a gleaming marble floor and walls adorned with photos honoring basketball legends. A receptionist immediately recognized her, standing up with professional courtesy. "Hello, you must be Shanice Williams, right? Please follow me." She followed the woman down a long hallway, her heart racing in her chest. Everything that had happened in the last 24 hours felt like a strange dream she hadn't quite understood. They stopped in front of a large door and the woman smiled reassuringly before opening it. The spacious room opened before her, filled with light from ceiling-high windows, revealing a sweeping view of the city below. Behind a polished wooden desk sat a large man with a calm yet powerful smile. As he stood and walked toward her, she realized he was much taller than she had imagined. An imposing figure, but not intimidating. Instead, there was warmth in his gaze and demeanor. "Shanice, it's a pleasure to meet you." She was stunned, her hand trembling slightly as she shook his. It felt like touching something bigger than anything she'd ever known. I don't know what to say," she stammered, trying to process what was happening. Shaq chuckled, pulling out a chair for her. "Take a seat, let me explain everything." She sat down, trying to stay calm, though her mind was still spinning. Shaq leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, looking at her with sharp yet non-inquisitive eyes. "Do you know why I called you here?" Shanice shook her head. She truly didn't have an answer. Shaq nodded, as if he had anticipated her reaction. "I've been watching you for the past month." Her eyes widened, her entire body tensing. "Watching me?" "Yes," he said. "I've been around the city, trying to better understand the community I want to help. I've been to Jerry's Diner, not just once, but several times, observing how people work, how they treat customers, how they treat each other." She held her breath, feeling as if an invisible door had just opened, revealing a truth she had never considered. "I didn't just watch you last night, Shanice. I've been watching you for weeks before that." Shaq leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful as if recalling something. "I saw you secretly adding extra food to the bags of the homeless. I saw you chatting with an elderly woman at the end of your shift. I saw you stay late to clean up the diner, even though it wasn't your job." Shanice felt her breath catch in her throat. "You did all those things without expecting anyone to praise you or even notice. You helped without expecting anything in return." She was stunned, her heart racing at his words. "And that's the person I've been looking for." She still couldn't grasp what was happening, feeling like reality was shattering into pieces she couldn't put together fast enough. "Looking for," she repeated weakly, as if her brain hadn't processed the full meaning of that statement. Shaq smiled. "I'm looking for someone to lead my charity fund, someone who truly understands this community, not just through data or reports, but through their own experience and heart. I need a leader, and you're the only one I see fit for the role." She almost laughed. She, a waitress just fired, leading a charity fund? It sounded absurd, but Shaq didn't seem like he was joking. "I don't need someone with an MBA. I don't need a CEO with decades of experience. I need someone who understands the true meaning of helping others. And you, Shanice, are that person." She opened her mouth to object, but Shaq raised a hand to stop her. "Your salary will be double what you were earning before. You'll have full insurance, the best benefits, and most importantly—" He leaned forward, his gaze sharper than ever. "Destiny will get free basketball camp, not just this summer, but for the years to come." Shanice felt as though the world around her was spinning. Everything was happening too fast, too unexpectedly, too unbelievably. An hour ago, she had lost everything. Now, she was standing before a door leading to an entirely new life. She looked up at Shaq, seeing him patiently waiting for her response. A decision that could change everything. Was she ready to step through that door? Shanice drove home, her mind still spinning. She had gone through many difficult moments in life, but she had never faced a decision this big. An hour ago, Brad had ruthlessly fired her, taking away the only job she knew how to do well. Now, Shaquille O'Neal had just offered her a leadership position in his charity foundation, a job she had never even considered, an opportunity far beyond anything she had ever dreamed of. She couldn't understand why he had chosen her. She was just a waitress, without a degree, without management experience. She had never sat in a fancy office, never had a steady salary that allowed her to stop worrying about bills every month. All she knew was working hard, trying each day to take care of Destiny. But Shaq had seen something in her that she herself didn't dare to believe. She pushed the door open and walked into the house, seeing Destiny sitting on the living room floor, still in her basketball gear, spinning a ball as a habit. When she saw her mom, the girl immediately looked up, her eyes bright. "Mom, what's wrong? Is something happening?" Shanice sat down next to her daughter, sighed, still unsure where to start. "I just got an opportunity, a new job, but I don't know if I should take it." Destiny tilted her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What job, Mom?" "A basketball charity organization. They want me to help run a program for underprivileged kids to give them a chance to play just like you." The girl blinked and then eagerly grabbed her mom's hand. "Then do it, Mom. That's the best thing I've ever heard." Shanice smiled lightly, but still felt unsure inside. "I don't know if I can do it, Destiny. I don't have a degree. I have no experience. I've never worked in a big organization like that." Destiny squeezed her mom's hand more firmly, her gaze more serious than ever. "But Mom, you always help other people. That's the most important thing. This is your chance to get something back. Don't you see that?" Shanice was taken aback by her daughter's words. Over the years, she had tried to teach her daughter that kindness was always more important than anything else. And now, Destiny was reminding her of that lesson. "You told me that if we can help someone, we should, right?" Destiny continued, her voice resolute. "Now you can help hundreds, even thousands of other kids. You can't pass it up just because you're scared." Her daughter's words hit her doubts like a punch. She had spent her whole life helping those around her without expecting anything in return. And now, someone was giving her the chance to do that on a much larger scale. She squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling the unconditional trust Destiny had in her. Not everyone gets an opportunity like this. If she turned it down because of fear, would she regret it? Picking up the phone, she stared at the number Patricia, Shaq's assistant, had given her before leaving the office. She pressed the call button, her palm still sweaty. Patricia's voice came through on the other end. "Ms. Williams, have you made your decision?" Shanice took a deep breath, then replied, her voice firmer than ever. I accept the job." On the other end, Patricia smiled. "Wonderful. Welcome to our team." Shanice let out a sigh of relief. One decision could change everything, not just for her, but for Destiny, for the other kids out there who, like her daughter, were dreaming. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. The next morning, as Shanice walked into the headquarters of the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation, a wave of nervousness surged within her. Everything felt so new, so unfamiliar. No more uniforms, no more ringing bells signaling orders in the kitchen, no more cleaning tables, pouring coffee, or hurriedly counting tip money at the end of the day. Today, she was no longer a waitress. Today, she was starting her job as the executive director of a charitable foundation. Although she had tried to mentally prepare herself, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the professional and upscale environment around her. The employees in their tailored business suits, the detailed plans posted on glass walls, the budget numbers, reports, long-term strategies, all of this was something she had never encountered before. A young assistant led her down a vast corridor to the main conference room, where she would have her first meeting with the foundation's board of directors. As she walked through the heavy wooden door, she immediately sensed the serious atmosphere enveloping the room. 7 men and women in suits, their faces filled with judgment, sat around a long meeting table. A few of them glanced at her, their eyes betraying skepticism. At the head of the table, Shaquille O'Neal sat silently, observing, saying nothing. Shanice pulled out a chair, sat down, and tried not to let the tension overwhelm her. She knew what they were thinking. A former waitress from a small diner with no leadership experience, who had never managed an organization. How could someone like her handle a large charity, manage millions in budgets, and create programs to help children? The man sitting across from her spoke first, his voice steady but tinged with doubt. "Ms. Williams, I'm Richard Parker, the Foundation's CFO. I have no doubt about your intentions, but can you explain to us why you are the best choice for this position?" All eyes turned to her, waiting for an answer. Shanice took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't have a degree in management. I don't have experience running a charity. I know that. But I understand the kids out there, kids like my daughter, kids who love basketball but don't have the chance to chase their dreams." She looked each person in the eye, not shying away. "I know what it feels like to work 2 jobs just to scrape enough money together to send my kid to summer camp. I know what it's like for parents to tell their kids, maybe not this year, but I'll try next year. And I know there are thousands of kids out there in the same situation." A platinum-haired woman, sitting at the far end of the table, crossed her arms and spoke with a tone of derision. "So, you think that understanding is enough to run a multi-million-dollar organization?" Shanice didn't blink. "Number. But it's the most important thing to get started." She straightened her posture, her voice firmer. "I'm not here to paint rosy pictures on paper. I'm here to create real change. I want to set up free basketball training camps for kids in underserved areas. I want to ensure that no child has to give up their dream just because their parents can't afford it. And I don't need an MBA to know how to do that." The room fell silent. Shaq, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly chuckled softly, his eyes shining with satisfaction. "That's why I picked you." Richard Parker cleared his throat, still not entirely convinced. "Do you have a specific plan? I mean, aside from passion, do you have a real roadmap to make what you just said a reality?" Shanice nodded. I spent all of last night thinking about it." She opened the file in front of her, pulling out a sheet of paper covered with notes. "First, we need to identify areas with kids who love basketball but don't have access to training. I want to set up at least 3 community basketball centers in the first year, partnering with local schools to find talented kids who lack resources. I want to create a scholarship fund for promising students, not just for basketball, but to help them continue their education." She placed the plan on the table, looking around. "I'm not a financial expert, but I know how to talk to parents. I know how to connect with kids. I know how to create an environment where they can trust and grow, and if that's not enough, I'm willing to learn." Once again, the room fell into silence. Shaq clasped his hands in front of him and smiled. "Any more questions?" A few board members exchanged looks, but no one spoke up. Richard Parker sighed, flipped through the plan, and nodded slowly. "I still have doubts, but I have to admit, you have a practical approach." The platinum-haired woman crossed her arms again, still not fully convinced but no longer opposed. Shaq stood up, lightly tapping the table. "Well then, the meeting's over. Shanice, welcome to the team." She exhaled, feeling like she had just passed a battle. As everyone started to rise and leave the room, Shaq turned to her, his voice softer but sincere. "They'll need time to trust you. But don't worry, I've believed in you from the start." Shanice clenched her fist, feeling a surge of positive energy for the first time that day. She knew there would be many challenges ahead, but she was ready to prove them wrong. The real work was just beginning. The meeting had ended, but the tension still hadn't left Shanice's body. She could clearly feel the skepticism from some members of the board, but it didn't discourage her. She had no intention of proving herself through words. She would let her actions speak for themselves. After returning to her new office, a small but tidy room on the 3rd floor of the Foundation's headquarters, she spent the entire afternoon reviewing a stack of documents about ongoing projects, community basketball programs, scholarships for underprivileged children, plans to expand the sports center. Everything looked good on paper. But when she opened the detailed financial reports, a strange feeling crept into her chest. At first, everything seemed normal. The expenses for training programs, scholarships, and operational costs all appeared reasonable. But the more she examined, the more she realized the numbers didn't add up. In some categories, hundreds of thousands of dollars were recorded, but there was no clarity about their origins or destinations. Some grants were listed but lacked full documentation, and some expenses appeared in the report without accompanying receipts. She frowned, expanded the spreadsheet, and meticulously checked each line of data. The numbers disappeared and reappeared. Funds were being moved between accounts unusually. Large grants from philanthropists were recorded but didn't show up in the actual fund. This wasn't a normal mistake. This was a sign that something was wrong. Shanice leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. If there was one thing she knew after years of working 2 jobs to support Destiny, it was that every dollar earned had to be clear and transparent. There was no way hundreds of thousands of dollars could disappear and then reappear by accident. She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. If she reported this, it could bring the entire foundation down. The programs that supported hundreds of children would come to a halt. The sports centers could be shut down, and the dreams she wanted to help nurture might vanish into thin air. But if she turned a blind eye, she couldn't. She wasn't that kind of person. She closed her eyes, trying to think clearly. Someone was manipulating the Foundation's books, and she needed to find out who and why. Shanice opened her internal inbox, searching for an email from Richard Parker, the Foundation's CFO, who had shown clear suspicion toward her during the morning's meeting. If anyone knew the state of the budget, it had to be him. She began typing the email. "Hello, Mr. Parker. I've reviewed the financial report, and there are some unclear points I'd like to discuss. Could I meet with you tomorrow to go over it? I'd like to better understand the allocation of funds before we roll out the new program. Thank you. Shanice." She hit send and sighed. Shanice didn't know what she had just stepped into. But one thing was certain. She wouldn't turn back. Shanice sat in front of the computer screen, her eyes still fixed on the email she had just sent. A sense of unease crept into her chest. She didn't know how Richard Parker would react, but she was certain that asking about hundreds of thousands of dollars going missing wasn't something anyone would want to hear. Her phone buzzed. "Ms. Williams," Patricia's voice echoed, still calm as usual. "Mr. O'Neill wants to see you in his office right away." Shanice paused for a moment, her hand instinctively tightening on the edge of the desk. She hadn't thought Shaq would learn about this so quickly, but perhaps Richard Parker had already reached out to him. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed, then stood up and left her office, heading toward the largest executive suite in the building. The office door opened, and Shaq was sitting in a wide leather chair, his eyes focused on a stack of documents in front of him. When he saw her enter, he looked up and gestured for her to sit down. Shanice sat upright, her hands neatly placed on the desk. She didn't allow herself to show any signs of anxiety, but inside she was still on edge. "I hear you have some concerns about the fund's finances?" Shaq asked, his voice deep but without any hint of reproach. Shanice didn't hesitate. "I've gone through the financial reports, and I noticed several large amounts of money lacking transparency. Some grants disappeared and then reappeared, without valid receipts or detailed records. I'm not sure whether it's an accounting error or something else, but I think we need to review everything. We owe it to those we're helping to be honest." Shaq leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms in front of his chest, his sharp eyes studying her as if evaluating something. Then, suddenly, he burst out laughing. Shanice froze. She had just reported a potentially serious issue that could affect the entire fund, but Shaq was laughing? "I knew you'd do this," Shaq said, his smile still lingering. "You're the first to report it." Shanice furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean?" Shaq pushed the stack of documents toward her. This was a test. She stiffened, her eyes scanning the pages. It was the same financial report she had reviewed, but at the bottom there was a small note. "Test transparency of the new community program director." Her heart skipped a beat. "We intentionally altered some of the figures, moved money around between accounts to see if you'd catch it," Shaq explained. "We wanted to know if you were honest enough to report it, or if you'd choose to ignore it." Shanice let out a deep breath, feeling as if a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders. But immediately, a small wave of anger rose within her. "You tested me?" Shaq nodded, showing no sign of regret. "You're running a charity. If you're not willing to stand up for transparency right now, how can I trust that you'll do it when a real situation arises?" She fell silent, unable to deny the logic of his words. Shaq leaned forward, his voice more serious now. "Listen to me, Shanice. When you run an organization like this, you'll face a lot of tough situations. There will be times when doing the right thing could cost you support from some people, but the most important thing isn't pleasing everyone, it's doing what's right. Shanice swallowed, meeting his gaze. So, did I pass the test? Shaq smiled, nodding. Not only did you pass, but you just proved you're exactly who I've been looking for. She sighed in relief, feeling a wave of ease wash over her. Shaq stood up and extended his hand toward her. Welcome officially to the team, Shanice. Now, we have a lot of work to do. Shanice took his hand, feeling a true sense of trust from the man in front of her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she was more ready than ever. Shanice left Shaquille O'Neal's office with a sense of relief mixed with excitement. The test she had just passed not only confirmed her integrity, but also helped her realize the trust Shaq had placed in her from the start. She was no longer an outsider under suspicion. She was officially an important part of the foundation. The next day, when she walked into the boardroom, she no longer felt the anxiety she had felt before. The familiar faces of the board members now looked at her with a respect she had never seen before. Shaq sat at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of papers before pushing them toward her. Congratulations, Shanice. You're no longer just the community programs director. I want you to take on the role of executive director of the foundation. She stared at him in disbelief, her heart racing. You mean, I will be managing the entire organization? Shaq smiled. Exactly. You've proven that you not only have vision, but also integrity. I need someone like you to make sure everything we do aligns with our original mission. Shanice took a deep breath and looked down at the contract in front of her. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a whole new life. She had started this journey with the simple goal of helping Destiny and other kids have the opportunity to play basketball. But now, she held in her hands the chance to change an entire generation. She picked up the pen and signed the contract. As she set the pen down, she knew that a new chapter had just begun in her life. A week later, Shanice met with Shaq in his office to discuss the next project. When she walked in, he was already seated, with a familiar floor plan laid out in front of him. She walked over and realized it was Jerry's diner. "What are we going to do with Jerry's?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Shaq leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes filled with excitement. "I want to turn it into a basketball center for kids, not just one location, but nationwide." Shanice was stunned. "You want to turn all the branches of Jerry's Diner into sports centers for kids?" Shaq nodded. "Exactly. I didn't buy this restaurant chain just to invest. I bought it to create a legacy. I want us to transform places that once only served food into centers that nurture the talents and dreams of underprivileged kids." A wave of emotion surged within her. She had worked at Jerry's for 8 years, witnessed people come and go, and spent every little bit of her salary to support Destiny. And now it would become a place that offered not just food, but opportunities. But then a name flashed through her mind. Brad. She remembered the harsh look he had given her when he fired her, the cold tone he used when saying, "Rules are rules." But she also remembered what Shaq had said about kindness and second chances. She looked at Shaq, and a thought suddenly crossed her mind. "I want Brad to come back." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You mean the guy who fired you?" Shanice nodded. "I know he treated me badly, but I also understand why. Brad's not a bad guy. He's just too obsessed with the rules. He tried everything to save money so his daughter could go to basketball camp. I think he needs a second chance." Shaq paused for a few seconds, then smiled. I like the way you think. Let's see if he deserves that chance." 3 days later, Shanice walked into Jerry's diner once again, but this time she wasn't a fired employee. She was the one deciding the fate of the place. Brad stood behind the counter, his face full of surprise when he saw her. He looked thinner than the last time she saw him, his eyes slightly dim, as if he had been under a lot of pressure. "Shanice?" He stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "What are you doing back here?" She smiled, but her voice was no longer weak like before. "I'm here to give you a chance." Brad furrowed his brow. "A chance for what?" She took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. "I want you to become the first manager of the new basketball center we're going to build here." Brad was stunned. "Are you kidding me?" Shanice shook her head. "I'm not kidding. We're going to turn Jerry's into a place that helps kids like your daughter, and I think you're the right person to manage it." Brad opened his mouth as if to say something, but then stopped. She could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the pride, the doubt, and even a little regret. Finally, Brad sighed and nodded. "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you." Shanice smiled. "It's nothing. I'm just doing what I believe is right." As she walked out of Jerry's, taking one last look at the building before it was transformed into a basketball center, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment rise within her. Not only had she been given a second chance, but so had everyone around her. Shanice stood on the sidelines of the basketball court, watching Destiny race across the floor, the ball spinning smoothly in her hands as if it were a natural part of her body. The crowd erupted in cheers as Destiny made a perfect three-point shot, the ball sailing in a beautiful arc and falling through the hoop without touching the rim. The entire team jumped up in celebration and the coach clapped with pride. From the stands, Lisa Leslie, the WNBA legend who had been coaching Destiny for the past 6 months, smiled with satisfaction. The girl wasn't just improving, she was becoming a true star. "She can go far," Lisa said, standing next to Shanice. "Not only does she have the talent, but she also has a strong will. I've never seen a kid train as hard as she does." Shanice looked at her daughter with pride. "She's always been like that. Once she sets a goal, she doesn't stop." Lisa nodded. "I have good news for you. Destiny has just been selected for the national youth team. She'll represent the country in international tournaments." Shanice froze, her hands instinctively tightening. "Really?" Lisa smiled. "Yes, really. She absolutely deserves it." Shanice turned to look at Destiny, who was grinning brightly and hugging her teammates after the game. Her heart swelled with joy. From a little girl who only had a dream and couldn't afford to go to basketball camp, Destiny was now reaching new heights. But that joy wasn't just for her and her daughter, because the dreams of thousands of other kids were also becoming a reality. Free basketball program expands. Under Shanice's leadership, basketball centers had spread across the nation. Children who once played with old, worn-out basketballs on rough concrete courts now had professional places to train, with real coaches. In the poor neighborhoods, where kids had few choices but to wander the streets, the air was now filled with laughter and the sound of basketballs bouncing on wooden floors. Sports centers had opened, not only helping kids develop skills but also offering full scholarships, enabling them to continue their education alongside sports. Shaq not only provided funding, but also actively participated in the training process, visiting each center to talk and inspire the kids. The children, who had once thought their dreams were impossible, now saw themselves reflected in people like Shaq, Lisa Leslie, and even Destiny. One day, when Shanice was inspecting a newly opened center, a shy boy approached her. "Hello, Mrs. Williams. I just wanted to say thank you." She was surprised and bent down. "Thank you for what, sweetie?" The boy tightened his grip on the basketball in his hands. "I never thought I'd have a real chance to play basketball, but now I have a place to train, I have someone to guide me, and—" He hesitated but then smiled brightly. "I have a dream." Shanice felt her eyes well up. This was the reason she did all of this. Not for fame, not for money, but to open the door to possibilities that she once thought were impossible. As she turned to walk away, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a call from Shaq. She answered the call. "Shanice, get ready. We're about to face a bigger challenge." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Someone is trying to block our project." Shanice stopped, a sense of unease creeping into her heart. She had thought that once the project was up and running, everything would run smoothly. But she was about to realize that when you do something truly meaningful, there will always be those trying to stop you. Shanice stood at the edge of the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. All around her, the atmosphere was filled with excitement and anticipation. Today, the first basketball center, renovated from the old Jerry's Diner, was officially opening. A place that once served fast food had now become a home for hundreds of kids who loved basketball, kids who never thought they would have a real opportunity. In front of her, the basketball court gleamed under the lights. Along the benches on either side of the court, hundreds of people had gathered for the ceremony. Parents, coaches, children from underprivileged backgrounds who now had a chance to play, and even the businessmen who had sponsored the project. They were there not only to celebrate the event, but to witness a symbol of hope. Shanice took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. She looked down at the front row and recognized some familiar faces. Brad, who had once fired her, was now sitting in the front row, wearing a T-shirt with the foundation's logo, a clear sign that everyone deserves a second chance. Destiny, standing beside her coach, Lisa Leslie, with a bright smile. The girl was about to step onto a bigger playing field, but today she was here to witness where it all began. And right behind everyone, almost blending into the crowd, was Shaquille O'Neal. He still wore his baseball cap and carried the same humble demeanor as the first night he walked into her diner, as if he was not a basketball legend, but simply a man who believed that kindness could change someone's life. Shanice picked up the microphone, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel scared. She knew that everything she had done, every challenge she had faced, every decision she had made had led her to this moment. She smiled and looked out at the crowd. 8 years ago, I was just a waitress. I had nothing but a daughter with big dreams and a heart that believed in kindness. She looked toward Destiny, seeing the girl's radiant smile. I used to think dreams were only for those who could afford them. But then I realized that sometimes the biggest dreams aren't our own, but helping others achieve theirs. She took a deep breath, her voice growing stronger. A small decision, helping a stranger on a late night, changed my life. But more importantly, it changed a whole community. She gestured toward the newly opened basketball court. And now, this place will continue to change many more lives. The entire stadium erupted in applause, But for Shanice, there was no recognition more important than the image before her. Hundreds of kids holding basketballs, their eyes full of hope. Shaq stood up, walked over to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice deep but warm. "You did it, Shanice." She looked at him, feeling the deeper meaning in his words. It wasn't just about completing a project. It was that she had truly changed something. From someone who once only knew how to serve, she was now serving a dream bigger than herself. As the kids began running onto the court, as Destiny took the ball and made the first shot on the new floor, as laughter filled the air, Shanice knew her story was just beginning. So, from a small decision on a late night, Shanice not only changed her own life, but also changed a community. She started this journey with kindness and determination, and now she had become the one opening doors for thousands of kids to chase their dreams. This story isn't just about basketball. It's a testament to the power of kindness, second chances, and perseverance through challenges. Have you ever witnessed a small act that made a big impact on someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Remember, sometimes a small act of kindness can change the whole world. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.